Hello, everybody. Welcome to this video lecture, which is about some ways of thinking about the relationship between culture and technology. Culture and technology are both words that lend themselves to both broader and narrower definitions. In a narrow sense, culture has been described as a limited domain of works of created expression, paintings, classical music, novels, etc. In this sense, to have culture means to be familiar with a certain canon of privileged bodies of knowledge. But in the broader anthropological sense, culture has been described as the totality of a certain way of life. In this sense, everyone has culture, and culture is defined as everything that characterizes the texture of everyday life. In this broader definition, everything around us and inside of us is part of our culture. In general outline, these are the narrow and broad definitions of culture. Technology also lends itself to the same kind of definitional flexibility. Most of the time, we think of technology in a narrow sense as referring to electronic gadgets and cutting-edge materials that have been recently invented. iPhones, laptops, 3D printers, nanofibers, semiconductors, etc. But on the horizon of this narrow definition lies the more inclusive definition of technology as any tool or technique that has been artificially devised to do work. In this sense, technology refers not only to the latest gadgets, but also to the hoe and the plow, fire and stone tools, shoes and clothes, writing, and maybe even language itself. This broader definition of technology also opens out to include systems of global commerce, exchange, diplomacy, defense, and communication, all the procedures and structures that human beings use to do the work of cohabiting the planet. At the broader levels, therefore, culture and technology blend into one another as general terms to describe the totality of human social reality. Debates about the relationship between culture and technology often hinge on how both terms are defined. One common argument is that culture and technology are opposites of one another. This debate tends to identify both culture and technology with their narrow definitions, culture as a refined aesthetic pursuit, and technology as a fascination with novel consumer devices. It is common to hear both sides of this kind of culture versus technology debate. On the one side are the advocates of culture, railing against the barbarians of technology. They argue that great art and literature have uplifting value that nourishes the soul and expands the mind. But in a world where everyone is scrolling through their phones all day, the personal qualities required for engaging with great art, attention span, empathy, a certain amount of creative boredom, have become degraded. The technologies of video games, television, and maybe even capitalism itself have led to the death of culture, depriving us of the ennobling values that nourished the souls of our ancestors. Then, on the other hand, there are the techno-triumphalists who revel in the futurity and newness of technology as a perfect antidote to what they may perceive as the stodgy, traditionalist, and slow media of the past. These advocates of technology may rightly argue that the narrow definition of culture involves elitist assumptions that are inextricably rooted in the classism, racism, and sexism that this concept of refined culture has often been used to enforce. Advanced technology, technology in the narrow sense, can liberate the human race from the ghosts of the past by its sheer newness. If technology kills culture, such people argue, it replaces it with its own culture, a culture of sparkling rapture and an endless scrolling feed of possibilities. There are also voices in the middle ground of this debate who emphasize the ability of technology to disseminate cultural texts more democratically, so that everyone can watch Shakespeare plays on their phone, for example. Likewise, culture can also support technological development, as suggested by the example of computer engineering schools that encourage students to study the work of Renaissance painters. Arguments that seek to reconcile the divide between culture and technology, which tracks with a wider semantic separation between the humanities and the sciences, focus on ways that these domains can enhance one another and, in doing so, enrich the broader techno-cultural matrix that we live within. When we turn our attention to the broader meanings of both culture and technology, a different array of perspectives emerges regarding the relationship between these two terms, and specifically, the question of which is more basic, more primordial to human history and self-understanding. When culture is considered in its broadest sense as the totality of a certain way of life, then technology can be considered as a reflection of cultural forces. In the same way that a poem, a play, or a movie can be interpreted as a creative reflection of the culture that produced it, so can a steam engine, a smartphone, or a ballistic missile. Technology, that is just another form of cultural expression, another way that people represent their experience as human beings. From a critical perspective, this approach suggests that we can read a piece of technology the same way we can read a commercial for the assumptions and representations embedded in its structure. At the same time, however, it is also important to acknowledge that technologies are not simply aesthetic objects, they have instrumental functions that differentiate them from works of art. They may be richly layered with significations, but unlike with a work of art, these significations are not the sole point of technologies. Technological objects make things happen, and one of the things that they make happen is us, our history, our daily lives, and even the structure of our consciousness. A smartphone isn't just an object for aesthetic or critical contemplation. It actually changes the human reality of how people communicate with one another, what they do with their time, and even how they think about themselves. This insight undergirds a reversal of the paradigm that technology is a form of culture, the thesis that culture is shaped by technology, or even that culture is a form of technology. On the one hand, it is easy to see examples of new technologies opening new creative possibilities and forms of cultural expression. One of the most vibrant forms of human self-expression in 2024, the YouTube Short, did not exist 5 years ago, and is obviously unthinkable outside of the technological conditions that gave rise to it, the widespread availability of smartphone cameras, digital compression, and internet access. To take another example, cinematic digital effects have not only equipped filmmakers with a new tool, but they have also affected the kinds of movies that get made, suggesting the way that technological change can drive cultural change. In the wider perspective, YouTube and movies themselves are art forms that rely on specific technologies, and going back further, it is also the case that novels did not exist before the technologies of bookmaking and printing, and that even cave painting relies on a sophisticated technology of pigment mixing. In all of these ways, technological innovation, some might argue, is the primary mover of human activity, with cultural expression being something that occurs in the wake of technology's onward advancement. Moreover, if we return to the broad definition of technology described earlier, any cultural activity necessarily takes place within a social structure, and the development and perpetuation of social structures can be considered one of human beings' oldest and most pervasive technologies. A human society is a kind of living apparatus, engineered collectively to do the work of keeping itself alive. The question of whether the project of social cohesion is a technological achievement or a cultural achievement, or some combination of both, or some dynamic tension between both, wavers and oscillates. At one moment, it looks as if culture encompasses technology. The next moment, it looks as though technology encompasses culture. The next moment, they look like two ways of saying the same thing. In any event, thinking deeply about the meaning of these terms and their relationship to one another provides a powerful opportunity to examine foundational and often invisible structural features of our shared reality.